My name off camera is Jay Malinowski. We're talking today with Jan Matuzak, retired some years ago from the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, and we'll get into the specifics of that. This interview is part of the Colorado River Board and Colorado River Association Oral History Project, which goes back almost 20 years, so actually a little more than 20 years, where we are recording and storing interviews of people who have had significant influence on Colorado River issues. And so with that introduction, thank you, Jan, for joining us today. This is November the 15th, 2024. And let's start, if you would, with what I'll call the bona fides, how you got into the water biz, maybe your college background and your movement into water.
Thank you, Jay. I graduated from California State University, Long Beach with a bachelor's degree in engineering. I majored in civil engineering in 1978. I applied for and was in a position at the California Department of Water Resources in the Southern District here in Los Angeles as a junior civil engineer. And first assignments were to work on state water project proposals to store state water project water in groundwater basins here in Southern California. During that time, also the state reservoir system was recovering from the 1976-77 drought, and the department leadership was interested in what we would call stretching the use of Colorado River water in California, that is, to determine how entities in California could use more Colorado River water, in particular Metropolitan, since Metropolitan had both a contract for Colorado River water and a contract for state water project water. At the time, MWD was diverting approximately 800,000 acre-feet of Colorado River water, and then the remainder of the demand was from the State Water Project. The department was interested in Metropolitan diverting more water, up to 1.2 million acre-feet, the capacity of the Colorado River Aqueduct. And so it was through that process and a report that we prepared that we determined what might be possible in terms of Metropolitan using more Colorado River water.
But DWR's interest was in using less state water project water?
Yes, that's correct. The reservoir system was recovering from the 1976-77 drought, and Metropolitan's diversions of Colorado River water were based on the availability of inexpensive energy from Hoover and Parker power plants. And then the State Water Project water was available through inexpensive energy that was negotiated back by DWR back in the 1960s.
So what were so you're working for DWR and you are trying to get Metropolitan specifically to import more Colorado River water. What did you know about Colorado River and all of the various contracts and relationships at that time?
So at that time, we worked with the Colorado River Board and attempted to obtain the ability for the entities that were not using as much Colorado River water as possible to use more Colorado River water.
Well, was there someone other than MW?
Yeah, so there were, for example, wildlife refuges in California along the Colorado River that didn't have contracts for Colorado River water, so we were making it known that the Colorado River reservoirs were nearly full, and we were encouraging use of water. Once we prepared our report, the Colorado River Board had us involved in an interagency task force on the use of Colorado River water here in California. They had concerns with respect to how the Department of Water Resources was approaching this matter. So Also at that time, the department was investigating the use of water by Imperial Irrigation District, as a farmer in Imperial had complained about flooding of his land due to the use of Colorado River water in Imperial Valley. So
Now I have to ask, the farmer we're talking about is using Colorado River water, which in effect is federal. You're with the California State Department of Water Resources. How did how did that work? How is a state agency dealing with a federal, well, user of federal water?
the farmer filed a complaint with the department, which had the authority to investigate misuse of water. And so that started a process at the department to investigate whether Imperial was efficiently using Colorado River water. The tailwater and tallwater flows from Imperial were discharging into the Salton Sea, and the Salton Sea was rising and flooding this farmer's land. So
And so what was the outcome of that?
the outcome was that the department determined that there was misuse of water in Imperial, and they referred the matter to the State Water Resources Control Board.
And how did that go over in Imperial Irrigation District?
That was not received favorably in Imperial. So
And so was there an ultimate resolution to that then? I mean,
So with respect to my involvement, I applied for a position here at Metropolitan based on an advertisement in the Los Angeles Times in 1982, and I was hired by Metropolitan and worked in the first in the planning division at Metropolitan. So in terms of the State Water Resources and Control Board action, that was happening after I left the department.
oh, okay, good,
So-
thanks. So you joined Met in '82. If I'm remembering right, we had mammoth flows on the Colorado River in '81, '82. In fact, I think Glen Canyon Dam was in danger of overtopping. There was a lot of water on the river when you joined Met, and so what were you doing initially with Metropolitan? Were you working on state water project stuff or Colorado River stuff?
First on State Water Project matters, and Planning Division at that time was preparing reports for the Board of Directors on future availability of Colorado River water, and also a water supply and demand study emphasizing what the availability of both Colorado River water and State Water Project water were anticipated to be. After I joined Metropolitan, the chief engineer of the Colorado River Board, Myron Holbert, joined Metropolitan also as assistant general manager. And so when he had come over to Metropolitan is the point in time where I transitioned to working more on Colorado River issues. My previous involvement in terms of the department's interest in Metropolitan using more Colorado River water was viewed by Myron Holbert as concerning from the perspective that it was the Colorado River Board that was really the entity, the state entity that was involved in determining how much or what the Colorado River water use could be. So
Well, it's interesting that you joined Metropolitan at a time when they were ramping up or trying to maximize Colorado River water, and at the same time, the Salton Sea was in danger of flooding. And now it wasn't too many years after that that Metropolitan was trying to ramp down Colorado River use, or if Metropolitan wasn't trying to, the fact of the matter was there was less water available on the river. And at the same time, the Salton Sea is receding, which today in 2024 is a greater problem even than it was then. I guess the question is, or at least for the moment, what were your thoughts, again, in 1982, 83, 84, when you were working with Myron, on where the Colorado River was headed in terms of meeting demand to the lower basin?
So there was obvious concern that as Central Arizona Project water deliveries to Phoenix and Tucson ramped up in the 1985 time period, that there would be less Colorado River water available to Metropolitan based on the law of the river, the U.S. Supreme Court decree in Arizona versus California provided for California in a normal year to only receive 4.4 million acre feet per year. And Metropolitan had been relying on surplus water. So the emphasis at the time was to determine whether Metropolitan could negotiate an agreement with Imperial Irrigation District for water conservation. This being considering that there was an interest in having less Colorado River water used by Imperial, with Metropolitan being able to divert the water that Imperial conserved in return for Metropolitan making payments to Imperial for the conservation of the water. The initial negotiations in the 1984 to 1986 time period weren't successful. Imperial had an interest in receiving more funds from Metropolitan than Metropolitan was willing to contribute. So eventually in 1988, Metropolitan and Imperial had negotiated the agreement whereby Metropolitan would make payments for the physical features that would conserve water in Imperial, with the background being that the State Water Resources Control Board was also investigating the use of water by Imperial and had required Imperial to conserve 100,000 acre feet of water to avoid a misuse of water.
Correct me if I'm wrong, the Resources Control Board said you're wasting water to Imperial, you're wasting water, you need to fix it. And at the same time, Metropolitan was offering, in effect, to pay to fix it and take the water thus conserved. Is that a fair summation of that?
Yes, that is.
Is that what became known as IID-1?
Oh, right. In common parlance, that's what it was called when there was an interest in having a phase 2 IID conservation program, or even a phase 3 and phase 4 program.
So, did those additional phases ever happen?
So in 1995, Imperial and San Diego County Water Authority signed a agreement that would have Imperial transferring water, conserved water, to San Diego County Water Authority rather than to Metropolitan, with Metropolitan being the entity that would convey the water to San Diego County Water Authority.
Okay, and you were at Metropolitan at that time. What was Metropolitan's thought about that agreement? Were they good with it, or was it contentious with respect to San Diego?
It was contentious from the perspective that San Diego did not have a contract for delivery of Colorado River water. Metropolitan held the contract, and so the concern was that San Diego would be in effect intervening in the priority system for use of Colorado River water in California.
If you could bring us full circle, because San Diego, indeed, if I'm remembering correctly, did have an original allocation of Colorado River water way back when, 1922. How did all that work, and where did that allocation go, and why?
So at the time of the negotiation of the seven-party agreement back in 1931, San Diego did have a allocation of 112,000 acre feet of water from the Colorado River. Thinking at the time was that perhaps San Diego would build their own aqueduct from the Colorado River, for example, from the terminus of the All-American Canal in the Imperial Valley. However, that aqueduct was never built. And at the time of World War II, San Diego's demand for water was increasing, and there was a need for additional water to be provided to the San Diego region, as there were military bases in the region. So the contract for San Diego's allocation was merged with Metropolitan's allocation, and San Diego County Water Authority joined Metropolitan as a member agency.
So they joined as the San Diego County Water Authority. And, and to be clear, San Diego was not one of the original member agencies when Metropolitan began.
That's correct. And the contract was for Colorado River water was held by the city of San Diego.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Oh, very good. So the city, again, just recapping, the city turned over their allocation to Metropolitan, and that enabled the County Water Authority to join Metropolitan as a member agency, and thereby get deliveries of water, especially important during the World War II and the war effort. When did San Diego begin getting deliveries from MWD?
So it would have been around 1948 at the time of the annexation. Right.
Okay. Did in any of the negotiations, especially with respect to San Diego negotiating to be a party to the IID deal, did they raise the issue of their original allocation, or just as a negotiating point, or was it really never an issue?
My recollection is that negotiations also involved the state and the interest on the part of the state for an arrangement to be made for California to be able to use more Colorado River water in the urban region. So eventually Metropolitan came to an agreement with San Diego that allowed the transfer to move forward. So
One of the things that I recall while you and I were both at Metropolitan is that you developed, and I think you developed it here, you developed a broad understanding of the law of the river. And I've got to ask an engineer why that was important to you, and really how did you do that? And I'm going to say for everyone to hear that I'm aware that often some of the attorneys working on these cases would defer to your not your legal judgment, but certainly your legal knowledge. And so that's my question. How did you acquire that, and why was it important to you?
So because of the priority system for Colorado River water, not only within California, but also among the three lower division states, Arizona, California, and Nevada, and also between the upper basin and the lower basin, there's a rich history of interstate compacts, federal laws, and federal contracts that were issued for Colorado River water. And it was necessary to understand the various provisions in those compacts, laws, and agreements in order to be able to work with trying to get Metropolitan more Colorado River water. So other agencies would raise issues associated with these compacts and laws and agreements that would had to be considered in order to allow Metropolitan to make itself available for more Colorado River water.
I'm going to ask you then, and I don't think I've ever asked even some of the attorneys that we've interviewed this question. How would you define the law of the river? We hear that phrase a lot, the law of the river. And in fact, Metropolitan, when it was in its original building on Sunset, had an entire room dedicated to the law of the river, books, manuscripts, papers. You could store that today on a thumb drive, and I understand that, but at the time we didn't have those. And so you had a 20 by 20 room with bookcases on all four walls except for the door. And people said that's the law of the river. So with that intro, define for me, if you would, the law of the river.
So, in terms of the books, the federal government had developed what they called the Hoover Dam documents, and then back in the 1940s, and this particular book had all of the interstate compacts, the federal laws, the federal contracts and agreements, and I think the book in effect served as a reference for anyone becoming involved in Colorado River issues that allowed everyone to be knowledgeable about the history and the background of the laws and agreements that affected use of Colorado River water. And the original book was updated around 1978, updating the Hoover Dam documents, and again included developments since the 1940s. I think it was just a matter of convenience for this term, the law of the river, to be developed to give everyone an understanding of the legal ramifications of Colorado River diversions contracts.
But it's a huge volume of paperwork when you look at it in total. Metropolitan General Counsel at the time, Carl Barake, and another attorney, Karen Tachiki, argued a portion of that case before the Supreme Court. Do you recall what that activity was about? What were Carl and...
So at the time, there were still unresolved claims by Indian tribes in California for Colorado River water. And so the litigation before the Supreme Court involved quantifying the Indian claims to river water. And the claims involved the number of irrigable acres within the reservations, and the Indian tribes were arguing for a larger quantification of Colorado River water based on more irrigable acres. And so the litigation involved Metropolitan arguing what in fact acres were irrigable on the reservations.
And how is that defined? What's an irrigable acre?
So it
let me rephrase
right.
that. Why would there be a dispute? You can either grow something on that acre or you cannot. I mean, so it's either irrigable or not. And so the question is, why would there be a dispute about that?
So the dispute surrounded the boundaries of the reservation, and the Indian tribes were arguing for a larger reservation boundary at the time.
Okay, so it wasn't a matter of the land being irrigable, it was just a matter of how much land was irrigable. Is that fair?
I think that's a fair statement.
Okay, and so how and when was that resolved?
So it was resolved in phases, with the last tribe, the Quechan Indian tribe near Yuma, Arizona, on the California side of the river, arguing that case, and Metropolitan settled that case with a settlement agreement rather than the Supreme Court reaching a decision between the parties.
Is that related to what came to be known as the Quantification Settlement Agreement, or is that a separate event?
The quantification settlement agreement was a separate event, and it quantified the rights of Palo Verde Irrigation District, Imperial Irrigation District, Coachella Valley Water District, to the amount of Colorado River water they would receive. Seven-party agreement that was executed in 1931 didn't allocate a certain amount of water. For example, the Coachella Valley Water District, Coachella received what was remaining of the agricultural priority, the 3.85 million acre feet. The concern on Coachella's part, for example, was that the more water used by Palo Verde, the Yuma Project, and Imperial, the less water that would be available to Coachella. And so Coachella was a prime party that was interested in the quantifying their rights to Colorado River water.
So carrying that through then, the 3.85 million acre feet of ag water, and I'll ask you to start with Palo Verde, and they took whatever they needed because they were for top priority, and whatever they didn't need then flowed to Imperial.
First to Yuma Project Reservation Division, which included the Quechan Indian Tribe and the Bard Water District, and then to Imperial after that.
Okay. And then what happened in Imperial with, so they now have this block of water coming to them, and they can use all they want.
Provided that it's not misused.
Okay. And whatever then is unused flows to Coachella.
Right.
And so I'm just trying to get down to the significance of the Quantification Settlement Agreement in terms of transferring water. So can you talk about that link between the QSA and the ability of the ag agencies to transfer water to a non-ag use?
Yes. So, for example, Imperial was agreed to a quantification of 3.1 million acre feet, and based on that quantification, since they had agreed with Metropolitan to conserve up to 110,000 acre feet, that water, in effect, that conservation agreement reduced the amount of water from the 3.1 million acre feet, and that water would be made available to Metropolitan. Similarly, with the San Diego County Water Authority transfer for approximately 200,000 acre feet, that conservation that was undertaken by Imperial for that program reduces the amount of water that Imperial can use. But again, the fact that it's conservation through canal lining, 12-hour delivery of water, spill interceptor canals, the irrigation water management, the amount of water available to the farmer for use on the land is not reduced. It's the conveyance losses, for example, that's reduced, and the farmer can use drip irrigation or linear move irrigation to reduce the amount of water they need to irrigate their crops. So the quantification settlement agreement allowed for a more efficient way to determine how much water is used by each of the agencies.
Metropolitan, for one, routinely used more than its allocation of Colorado River water with not illegally. It was surplus water.
Right.
Can you talk about that a little bit? And what I mean by that is Metropolitan's dependence on water that they really didn't have a contract for. It was a surplus at the time. Is that important? Did it go away? Is it going to go away? That is to say, the surplus water.
So the Metropolitan had a normal allocation to water plus a surplus allocation based on its 1931 contract, and back in 1987, Metropolitan negotiated a contract with the Bureau of Reclamation for even additional water. So at the time, Metropolitan had fourth and fifth priority to 1.212 million acre feet of Colorado River water, and the surplus contract that was negotiated allowed Metropolitan to divert up to 1.3 million acre feet, the capacity of its aqueduct, using 9 pumps. The Bureau of Reclamation had a process to develop an annual operating plan for the Colorado River reservoirs each year. And so there was a Colorado River Management Work Group that was formed that Metropolitan was a member of. And through that process, the Bureau of Reclamation would develop these annual operating plans and determine whether there would be surplus water available to Metropolitan, or whether Metropolitan could use water that was unused by Arizona and Nevada, a provision that was permitted by the U.S. Supreme Court decree in Arizona versus California. So there were a number of years in the 1990s where, up until around 2001, where Metropolitan was able to continue to use as much Colorado River water as it needed.
Okay. Let me interject, because you mentioned a 9-pump flow, which most people watching this going, what? And I'll just add that Metropolitan's Colorado River Aqueduct typically runs on an 8-pump flow with 1 pump in reserve. And when Jan noted a 9-pump flow, that means that there's a lot of water available on the Colorado River. And you're actually running the aqueduct above capacity. Unusual to do that, but it's taking advantage of flood flows and a super amount of water on the river. So that's what a 9-pump flow means. Were you involved, or did you get involved with any of the negotiations over minute items with Mexico? That's one issue. Salton Sea, that's another issue. New River water contamination, that's an issue. And the Yuma desalter with respect to water quality being delivered to Mexico. Now, I think some of those are before you joined Metropolitan. But did you get involved in any of the discussions or operational issues on any of those?
Yes. So, for example, on the Yuma desalting plant, in the more recent past, the state's Southern Nevada Water Authority, Central Arizona Water Conservation District, and Metropolitan were interested in having the Yuma desalting plant operate. The Bureau of Reclamation had not operated the plant for a number of years after it was completed, and so there was an agreement reached to operate the plant for approximately 1 year at, if I recall correctly, 1/3 capacity, with the water agencies providing funding for that. So that did take place. And there was also a study regarding the water quality that took place at the time. In terms of minute items,
Well, let me just go back to the desalter.
Sure.
There may be some people that don't know what the heck we're talking about. What is the Yuma desalter, and why is it important?
So the Welton Mohawk Irrigation District returns flow to the Colorado River. That flow is saline, and Mexico objected to the quality of water it was receiving back in the 1960s. And so in order to resolve that issue, the Bureau of Reclamation constructed a desalting plant near Yuma, Arizona, to desalt the return flow and deliver better quality water to Mexico. At the time, operating the plant was expensive, and with having sufficient flows when the reservoirs were full or nearly full, the Bureau of Reclamation decided not to operate the plant. So the in terms of minute items that you brought up, Metropolitan had an agreement as a result of a request by the International Boundary and Water Commission to deliver water on an emergency basis to the city of Tijuana, and that involved what's called a minute, which is an agreement that is executed by the U.S. section and the Mexico section of the International Boundary and Water Commission to make those types of arrangements between the two countries. So the delivery of water was through Metropolitan system, San Diego County Water Authority system, and the Otay Water District system, and a pipeline was built to deliver that water across the international boundary to the city of Tijuana. When Tijuana could not meet its demand, either because of the inability to operate the aqueduct from the Mexicali Valley to Tijuana, or due to other issues associated with Mexico's system for delivering water within the city. So there were a number of minutes executed over a period of time as this arrangement continued over a few decades. There was also more recently minutes involving the ability of Mexico to conserve Colorado River water and store that water in Lake Mead, and so that involved a minute of the International Boundary and Water Commission. In terms of the Salton Sea, my involvement there was minimal. So,
Well, let me maybe introduce it a little bit in the sense that you've got competing interests with regard to the Salton Sea. If Imperial or another ag user overuses water or wastes water, as some people would claim, that water flows into the Salton Sea, and that's a good thing because it keeps the Salton Sea rising. To the extent that they conserve water, that reduces the amount of water flowing to the Salton Sea, and that's a bad thing. So you've got this balance going on, or not going on, I suppose. Did the aspect of damage to the Salton Sea ever enter into any of the negotiations or discussions that you had about the Habitat Conservation Plan or conservation in general or anything? I guess what I'm asking is to what extent in your dealings with Colorado River issues, and especially ag conservation, did the subject of the Salton Sea even come up?
So as part of the Imperial Metropolitan Water Conservation Agreement, Metropolitan provided Imperial with $23 million for what we called indirect costs. And so that money could be used for mitigation for the Salton Sea, but it was left up to Imperial to decide how to address that issue. And more recently, with once the San Diego IID transfer was implemented, IID began taking action to create habitat that would mitigate for lowering of the Salton Sea elevation due to conservation. But it was strictly up to Imperial to decide what programs to implement to deal with that issue.
Okay, I know while you were at Met, you had your hands in both State Water Project and Colorado River. Could you talk a little bit about Metropolitan's philosophy with respect to balancing those two water sources. As a reminder, on the one hand, you've got relatively high saline water, Colorado River water, relatively soft water, State Water Project water. You've got differential costs, differential supplies, differential demands. How did you go about, you and your staff, or either the people you worked for or the people who worked for you? How did you balance that use of State Water Project versus Colorado River water?
So there were, I'd say, approximately three issues that were involved. The first, as you indicated, was water quality. And so Metropolitan was interested in maintaining a salinity of no greater than 500 milligram per liter total dissolved solids in its water supplies. So that required blending of Colorado River water and State Water Project water at Metropolitan. There was also the issue of energy costs. And so for a period of time, Metropolitan's use of Colorado River water was limited to 800,000 acre feet because of the inexpensive energy available from Hoover and Parker power plants, but that was limited to diverting that amount of water. And then you also had the issue of whether whether Metropolitan received a allocation of State Water Project water that was equal to its contract amount, or whether it was less due to the fact that there was a drought and State Water Project reservoirs were not full; they were in a declining. So it was a balance of supply, water quality, and energy that Metropolitan had to evaluate on an annual basis.
Okay, good, thank you. Anything else? Any other major events or negotiations come to your mind that we haven't covered? I mean, you were with MWD for more than 20 years, right?
36 years.
36, that's more than 20. What comes to your mind in terms of your career at MWD related to the Colorado River that we haven't covered?
So back in approximately 1986, Metropolitan was interested in testing the concept of a land fallowing program in the Palo Verde Irrigation District. And so Tim Quinn and I were negotiating, or attempted to negotiate an arrangement with Palo Verde to fallow a portion of their lands within their irrigation district. The initial negotiations were not successfully completed because Metropolitan was offering payments that would be equal to the amount of profit, shall we say, that a Palo Verde farmer would receive from selling alfalfa that was grown on the land. Alfalfa would be a crop that typically would be taken out of production to fallow the land, whereas the Palo Verde negotiators were looking at it from the perspective of the amount of profit they were making from selling vegetable crops, which was higher than the amount of profit they would make from selling alfalfa or that type of crop. So eventually, though, in 1992, Metropolitan was able to complete negotiations on a test land fallowing program in Palo Verde for a 2-year period. And that saved 186,000 acre feet of Colorado River water that was stored in Lake Mead for future use by Metropolitan. The other projects that Metropolitan was interested in were conserving water by constructing new line canals, the All-American portion of the All-American Canal in Imperial Valley, and a portion of the Coachella Canal that had not been previously lined. The Metropolitan sought federal legislation to authorize the Secretary of the Interior to undertake those conservation projects, and federal law, Public Law 100-675, was signed by the President in 1988 that provided for the ability of the secretary to arrange for those canals to be lined.
Metropolitan was paying the costs, is that correct?
So that was the initial proposal. Eventually, with respect to subsequent developments, the state of California agreed to provide $200 million for the lining projects, and eventually the lining projects were completed. As part of public law that was passed in 1988, there was an Indian water rights issue in San Diego County that became attached to that legislation, the San Luis Rey Indian Water Rights Settlement Agreement, which would allow the Indian bands, 5 Indian bands in San Diego County, to, in effect, receive water from the canal as one, those canal lining projects as one possibility. And so eventually Metropolitan did negotiate an agreement with the settlement parties that allowed for Metropolitan to convey 16,000 acre-feet of water to San Diego County Water Authority for use by the settlement parties.
Why would the state of California get involved in the funding at that level for that project? I mean, is federal water going to Colorado River contractors? What? Tell me why the state. What did the state get out of it for their $200 million?
So I would say the state got the quantification settlement agreement out of the funding for the projects. It facilitated implementation of the settlement agreement.
Yeah, so in essence, just the conservation of water anywhere in California is a state interest.
Yes, it is, because anytime California can use more Colorado River water, it can reduce the amount of water needed from the State Water Project.
I know you've retired from Met, but I think you probably follow what's going on. How does Southern California in general, or Southern California specifically, and California in general, how are we today with respect to the supply-demand picture versus when you started with MWD?
So when I started with MWD, the Colorado River reservoirs were full, and surplus water was made available. Flows were going down to Mexico in excess of the 1.5 million acre-foot treaty requirement, and also the additional treaty water available when the reservoirs were full. So, however, by the time I retired, the Colorado River reservoirs were significantly lower, less than 50% of capacity, and the arrangements were dealing with shortage criteria, and when each of the states would have to take a shortage of Colorado River water. Fortunately, none of those shortages had occurred by the time I retired, but they have occurred since. Lake Mead is in a very low position right now, and so the emphasis is obviously on additional conservation and reduction in use of Colorado River water.
If you think about the collegiality, if I can coin a word, that existed when you were with either DWR or Metropolitan, for that matter, among the states, the two basins, then and now, is it better now, or is it maybe more contentious now than it was then? How have the relationships, not the individuals, but just institutionally, how have the relationships changed, if at all, between then and now? I mean, 36 years, it's a long time.
So I'd say the relationships were what you could call contentious based on the positions that the entities took initially when negotiations were beginning on a particular topic, but eventually compromise would come about, and while everyone didn't get everything they wanted out of a deal, there was an understanding that it was better to enter into an agreement on a particular topic rather than to go to litigation, due to the fact that the litigation would take a long period of time, and the decision of the judge or justices would be unknown and possibly of not of interest to one of the parties. Obviously, as time went on, the individuals involved changed due to retirements, and but I think everyone has been cooperative, and I think more so in the recent past.
What are your thoughts about the role of the Colorado River Board in the various negotiations that you've had to deal with over time? How important, and maybe in some cases the most important. I'm not sure. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you're coming into a negotiation from MWD, which carried a lot of weight because a lot of money and a lot of political power. But at the same time, you got this state agency over here, the Colorado River Board, which is which deals with multiple agencies on an equal basis. It's kind of a strange thing where you've got those 7 agencies represented on the board, and Metropolitan's one of those, and they tend to negotiate against themselves sometimes. But at the same time, the board itself is supposed to be cohesive. How did that work for you and for Metropolitan over time in the various Colorado River negotiations that you were involved with?
So the Colorado River Board's involvement primarily would occur in interstate negotiations, at least when I was involved. And so the executive director, or previously the chief engineer, would serve as what was known as the commissioner for the state in negotiations with the other states on Colorado River issues. So the Colorado River Board provided the opportunity for all of the 6 agencies that, plus the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power that were on the board, to present a cohesive and united front to the other states on negotiations that were taking place, for example, involving surplus water, negotiation of interim surplus criteria, negotiation of shortage criteria. So overall, it gave the agencies the opportunity to provide a united front.
Okay, good, thank you. Let me ask you if you'd recount most of the people that you met and dealt with, were remarkable. I mean, the ones that I know of. But who stands out in your mind over a 36-year career? You've dealt with a lot of folks out there in a lot of agencies, in a lot of states. Are there people that stand out in your mind as being particularly effective or particularly important in resolving Colorado River issues?
So one person that immediately comes to mind is Dennis Underwood, who I first met at the California Department of Water Resources when I was employed there. Dennis worked for the department. He then left the department and became executive secretary at the Colorado River Board. And then when Vern Valentine, the successor to Myron Holbert at the Colorado River Board, retired. Dennis became the executive director at the board and served in that role for a number of years. He later became commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation, and then later became assistant general manager here at Metropolitan, and then general manager. So Dennis's involvement stretched from being California's representative to then being the federal lead on Colorado River issues for the Bureau of Reclamation, and then here at Metropolitan. Enormous wealth of knowledge that Dennis had, and he really helped to unite the states and the agencies to reach agreements.
So you and he intertwined actually over
Right.
years.
Right.
Interesting. Anyone else come to mind? Carl Bronte, Tom Levy comes to mind?
Yeah, Carl Bronte obviously comes to mind in that Carl was instrumental in Metropolitan reaching agreement with Imperial on the water conservation program that we were able to complete in 1988, and so that was very helpful. Myron Holbert, another individual who was instrumental here at Metropolitan as assistant general manager with the Palo Verde program. He helped immensely in finally the Metropolitan reaching agreement on that program. So.
Okay. Very good. Well, I think we'll call it a day then, unless you've got something that popped into your mind that you want to add. We're kind of open-ended here, but...
So I would just mention that Colorado River salinity control was important to Metropolitan, and the 11 states worked cooperatively on salinity control. There's an organization known as the Colorado River Basin Salinity Control Forum that works to see that the federal salinity control program continues to be implemented. And there was always a need to ensure that sufficient federal appropriations were received for the Bureau of Reclamation and the U.S. Department of Agriculture to provide funding for on-farm salinity control measures. And so my involvement there was to serve as the alternate to Metropolitan's representative to the forum. The Metropolitan's representative was appointed by the governor. So when the representative wasn't able to attend the meetings, I was able to represent Metropolitan in that forum for a number of years.
Who was the representative?
So it changed from time to time, but originally it was Myron Holbert. Later became Dwayne Georgeson, who was assistant general manager here at Metropolitan more recently. And so those were two of the individuals who represented Metropolitan.
Is the forum's work ongoing?
Yes, the forum's work is continuing. Yes.
Okay. Very good.